Hi, my name is Kimba, and I am an alcoholic in recovery. My first sobriety date was my 24th birthday, which was July 10th, 1987. I flew through a plate glass window after drinking copious amounts of vodka and pink lemonade poolside in Long Island. I was a week from taking my New York State boards for a professional licensure, that of which I'd studied for 9 years in college. And I cut my right hand off to the extent that there was a 13-hour reparative surgery and I would be in a flexion cast for 14 weeks. And that was my introduction into Alcoholics Anonymous. When I was being prepared for surgery, I don't have much memory of anything that happened during that emergency visit. I was in and out of consciousness and losing a lot of blood. I had steel tendon replacements put in my hand so that I could work and have a hand. But I remember one thing very clearly, and that was my mother's face looking down on me, and she over the bed, and she was 7 months sober. And I didn't know what that meant, and we hadn't spoken much in those 7 months. And she looked at me and she said, and I couldn't hear her, but I could see her lips moving. She said, "Have you had enough?" I was scared. I was, to my best estimation, in the process of dying at that moment. And I shook my head yes. I went for surgery, and 13 hours later I woke. I think they handed me a glass of water, and she threw me in a wheelchair with my arm in a cast, and I went to my first AA meeting in the hospital where I had had the surgery. My journey through the early years of Alcoholics Anonymous was wondrous and painful. I spent a lot of time on my knees in prayer. I lived from foxhole to foxhole, so I had a higher power very early on in my journey. I was told to have one. My mom was sort of a temp home sponsor for me because I had to go back and live at home at that juncture. I was just such a dysfunctional mess. And I think, one of the most important messages that I can give through my recovery is the sense of dysfunction and unmanageability that I lived with on a daily basis through my drinking, my substance use. I was raised in a small town outside of New York City, a wealthy suburb of sorts, and we were entitled children. We had a good education, and we wore good, clean clothes, and most of my friends got cars for their 16th birthday. I did not. I got a bicycle. We didn't have much money. My mother is my qualifying alcoholic. Obviously, I mentioned that she was in the program just before I got in. I followed her like a duckling. I did have my own sponsors through the years. I moved out of New York State several times, and I ended up a sober, 30-ish-year-old single woman in upstate New York back in the 90s, where I met the fated man. My life, I lived a sober life, and I went to meetings all the time, and I had my sober cronies around me. I had decided to be a single mother by choice, but I did it in a sober way. So I was raising my one son, my eldest son, at that time, and I went to a lot of meetings. My life was manageable as a sober individual, but I still had vast amounts of dysfunction running in the background and sometimes in the foreground of my daily existence. I was a good worker. I was a perfectionist. I dedicated myself to my motherhood. But I met a man in upstate New York who wasn't from here. At that point in my sobriety, I was not emotionally sober enough to make many of the decisions that were about to come into my life. I did move to Easter Island, lived there for almost 2 decades, had a relapse and drank for a year with all 4 of my biological children on the ground. I have managed to work through great amounts of shame as I have left permanent scars on my children and was not successful in breaking the chain of addiction that runs through families. Today, I spend every day in 12-step programs. I've joined a sister program, a grandmother program, shall we say, of adult children of alcoholics, and I'm working in deep annals of my emotional being to remain sober, to actually find out who it was that I became over all these years. I am now back in the United States and working very, very closely in 12-step programs all over the world. And my message is one of hope and great faith, which is something that this program of Alcoholics Anonymous has given me for my whole life. Thank you for letting me share.